So we're welcoming everyone when you're joining us today for the Emerging Payments Association Asia hot briefing on the topic of importance of collaboration and technology in tackling payments fraud. So welcome everyone. We're just waiting while the numbers coming in a bit and we'll kick this off. Good. So I can start with introducing myself. I'm Camilla Bullock and I'm the CEO and co-founder of the Emerging Payments Association Asia. And for those of you who are not familiar with us, we are the peak body for payments in the APAC region, and we focus on policy and advocacy and hosting discussions where we're bringing the industry together to make sense of what's going on so we together can enhance the industry. And is ranging from a full area of topics, from back office of payments all the way to front office, merchant inquiry, and what merchants or B2B businesses are doing in payments. A lot of discussions are focusing around innovation and policy that's needed in the industry to enable safe and secure and innovative payments that are accessible for all and affordable. So today we're going to talk about fraud, and it is escalating as well as the payments are getting faster, the fraud is getting faster and also getting more sophisticated. And this is not a challenge for individual organizations in our ecosystem. It's something that we need to tackle together. The solution, we think, is collaboration, and where we start to work together with data sets and insight we have. And that is what we're going to talk about in the discussion. But before I kick off, I would like to see if everybody that's online now could just post of where they are located. I think that will help our panelists a little bit to sense on who's the line. And if you're watching this recording, please send us a comment also. And to lead the debate or the discussion today, we have Nick So, who is part of the Emerging Payments Association's Asia's advisory board. And we had a discussion on this topic in one of our meetings recently. And Nick said, this is really close to heart to what I'm doing. So I would like to bring it together and lead this discussion. And on his day-to-day job, Nick heads up global projects in APAC for HSBC. So Nick, welcome to being the moderator today. And with that, I think I'll hand it over to you.
Thank you so much, Camilla. Can I just do a sound check? Can you hear me clearly? Perfect. Thank you. So good afternoon again, everyone, and welcome to today's crucial discussion on the importance of collaboration and technology in tackling payments fraud. So as Camilla mentioned, Nick Soo here, advisory board member of EPAA, and in my day job, I run product management for HSBC Asia's wholesale payments business, right? So to payment enthusiasts, bankers, fraud and compliance professionals, and generally curious industry folks, big thank you for being here. And as Camilla mentioned, I'm sure the fact that you're in today's call, right? You are very well aware of the scourge of fraud and scams facing our industry today. But perhaps one of the things that you may not be fully aware of is the sheer amount of nuance that there is in these conversations, right? The challenge is immense, but how immense, right? There are also numerous countermeasures that have been put in place, but in some respects, are these just blunt instruments? And what we actually need, is surgical precision with scalpel, or lasers even, right? And in the meantime, they're also very promising solutions, but they're perhaps not surfacing to the right people in the industry. So we at EPAA and HSBC are very, very passionate about payments, which includes all the fun, and good innovative bits, but equally also on the important components of keeping all of us in the industry safe and the consumers as well. We are very, very invested in connecting the dots. And as Camilla said, we decided we should have this important conversation in public for the benefit of the broader payments community, right? One of the things I also want to stress, this is not just, we don't see this as a one-off webinar, done and dusted and walk away. So to us, this forms perhaps a very important foundational pillar to educate and hopefully align on some of the focus areas, following which the EPAA mechanism and all our various institutions here, our working groups, advocacy, we all do our part to take this forward. And in order to do this and do justice to our conversation, right, I'm very, very grateful I have a star-studded cast ranging from law enforcement, network operators, fintechs, as well as policymakers. And in order of their speaking slots today, we have Barry Tang, who is the DCI of Hong Kong Police Force's Joint Financial Intelligence Unit. Barry, I thought HSBC, we had long titles. I think you take the cake there. We have Avalon Ingram. She's Swift's APAC Head of Payments. We have Damien, CEO and co-founder of iPit, and I aligned with him. I'm not even going to try and pronounce his surname. He can do that for you later. We have Friedrich Klinger, advisor and tech lead of BIS Innovation Hub in Singapore. And we also have my fellow Malaysian, Aloysius Chong, head of fraud at Paynet. So as you each start your first response later, to my dear panelists, would also appreciate if you could do a quick 30-second intro of yourself before you get into your response. But first things first, to really set the scene, size up, the problem that's facing the industry, I'd like to turn to both Barry and Avalon, but I'll start with Barry. So Barry, super quick introduction, and also then tell us what really is the scale of the problem that the industry is facing? How is fraud evolving, right, from its various typologies? And in some respects, Hong Kong, Asia, global, can you give us also some statistics to give us a sense of scale of the issue, Barry?
Okay, sure. Thank you, Nick. First of all, I would like to introduce myself here. First of all, thank you so much for being invited by Nick to be here as one of the panelists to share about something from the police perspective or financial intelligence unit perspective. First of all, I would like to introduce myself. This is Barry Tang, the Chief Inspector of Hong Kong Police Force. I have been in the force for over 14 years, and then actually I was responsible for some intelligence and investigation in the specific domain, including the cyber fraud investigation, money laundering investigation, and some sophisticated fraud investigation. And then currently, I'm also responsible for some AI-driven projects to strengthen the capability of the combating the financial crimes for Hong Kong Police Force. So this is my brief introduction. So in order to set the scene for this panel discussion, I would like to illustrate some general global trend of fraud first. From the police perspective, actually, we observed some of the trends recently. First of all, we found that actually the fraud activities or some money laundering or financial crime activities keep increasing, and then with some increased sophistication. Some fraudsters will leverage some advanced technologies like AI or generative tools, even deepfake, to create some convincing scams. These generative AI is being used in scams like, as maybe all of you know, phishing, business email compromise, account takeover, some impersonation, or some cyber-enabled fraud. For example, the romance scam, investment scam. I think these kind of the typologies of the scam always happen in different regions or countries. The second trend we observe is the automation. The criminals are always use some automation to exploit the user's account while remaining undetected, increasing the risk of fraud. They may use some software or bots to perform tasks that would require human intervention. It will increase their efficiency for their criminal activities. So for some fraud or some deception cases, eventually the victims will lose the money. So to how to deal with these monies triggered by those scams is also very important step for the fraudster. So in the recent years, they will use some cryptocurrency or some digital assets for the part of the money laundering. And then I will now illustrate some the global trend for some respective countries near Hong Kong. For example, Singapore, China, and Australia. First of all, upon our intelligence exchange with different jurisdictions, we found that actually the fraud has surged dramatically. For example, in Singapore, in 2025, there are already 22,000 cases reported related to some scams, as I mentioned. They will also remain leveraging some advanced techniques like deepfakes or some other generative AI to commit these activities. like in mainland China, telecom fraud cases are also significantly increased. For example, some false investment, impersonating of logistics support, or even some investment scams. In Australia, we could see that actually there are sharp rise in fraud. Overall reporting cases from 2023 to 24 is around nearly 40%, 70%, particularly in some payment card fraud. For example, the card not present transactions. This is some common fraud activities happen in the recent year. Then back to Hong Kong, actually in the year of 2024, I can show you some concrete figures. There are around 100,000 cases reported in Hong Kong last year, and then around over 46% account for the deception and fraud cases in Hong Kong. The total monetary loss in 2024 is around Hong Kong dollars 9.5 billion dollars, representing that a loss of 700 Hong Kong dollars every 1 minute, which is a very serious problem in Hong Kong. Actually, this is a global problem. It was observed that there was an increase of some fraud cases compared with the last few years. So I think the fraud cases is a very major problem in for the overall crime trend. This is what we observe from the police perspective. Yeah.
Thank you so much, Barry. I think some of those points that you mentioned there really hit home, and particularly being based in Hong Kong, right, with a relatively small population, 100,000 cases as a percentage of the population is, indeed very significant. So thank you for painting that interesting but somewhat bleak picture for us. And I now like to move on to Avalon. So as SWIFT, obviously, right, a member-owned consortium, and you move the world's GDP every 3 days. I think, Avalon, you're very, very well placed to also tell us from your data what kind of observations on trends are you seeing in this space as well, and do kindly give us a brief intro too.
Sure. Thanks a lot, Nick, and great to be here with all of you this afternoon. Avalon Ingram. I've been at SWIFT for about the last 6 years and spent most of my career in financial crime compliance. So very well placed in this panel, although I have recently made a shift into the payment space. Barry touched on a couple of these issues already. The barrier to entry to become a fraudster is now really low. If you think about the different technologies that are available, you take someone who could be potentially quite incompetent and make them very competent very quickly. You're able to perpetrate scams in languages that you're not proficient in. You're able to use all of these new technologies like agentic AI to actually start executing attacks on your behalf. So we're seeing a very different landscape to what we have in the past. And sort of hot off the press, you may have seen this, Anthropic AI released an article around Claude being used to write code that attacked 17 organizations quite successfully. But Claude was also making decisions around which data to exfiltrate. It even suggested, the wording around the ransom demands, etc. Now, that's very little effort from an individual. So this industrialization of fraud is why it's becoming so difficult to kind of keep ahead of all of this. And then the other side of it is just generationally where we are. The platforms to which you can reach someone are vast. If you think about it back in the day, I remember growing up in South Africa, if your friends called you and you weren't at home, the landline was the only way that someone was reaching you, right? That's changed in many different ways. We walk around with mobile devices. We're very au fait with social media platforms. We don't just use them socially, we use them, in our professional lives as well. And because of how much information we also put out there about ourselves, we've also allowed an attack surface that becomes hyper-personalized. So I always say to people, be very careful what you put out in the public domain, because naturally, if someone shows any sense of familiarity around who we are, right, we're less likely to think of them as suspicious. And that is where we're seeing a lot of the success coming in with the use of these different generative AI techniques. There is that sense of familiarity because they've started to really draw on things that are part of your personal life and in that public domain. So I think when you kind of start intersecting all these things, we look at the amount of digital services we have now. Gone are the days where you have to walk into a bank to open up a bank account. Gone are the days where you must go to a government organization to apply for certain services, right? Everything has moved online. And then, with that comes the risk that all of these things can now be spoofed. You have all of these different fake websites that look very legitimate. So the more that we move to these sort of digital platforms and moving everything into these online services, unfortunately, they also become targets or capitalized by bad intended individuals.
No, thanks so much, Evelyn. I think the way I think about it, what you described, right, is that democratization, be it to financial access or to, new tools like Gen AI, I mean, they're equally empowering, but at the same time, it empowers everyone, right? And to your point about barriers to entry getting much lower. So another interesting but somewhat bleak worldview on the topic. But just before I head to Damien, Danelle, if you don't mind just pulling up the first Slido question I remembered. And the reason for asking this question is to perhaps help our next speakers also maybe contextualize some of the measures that are underway. So the question really is quite straightforward. And apologies, maybe I should have told everyone, get your mobile phones ready to scan the QR code or join us on Slido at the number that you see there, 24231114. And it's a really straightforward question, right? Do you believe that the industry is keeping up sufficiently with anti-fraud measures to protect consumers? And I think this really is just a temperature check, which most of you at this point in time say that a lot more needs to be done. Let's just give it a little bit more time. Very low percentage of the people who are online have participated so far. So maybe, Danelle, let's give it 30 more seconds, hopefully get a slightly larger sample size.
I can leave it up while you continue, Nicholas.
Okay, perfect. So yeah, I guess, Damien, we will head to you, and I think the results in some respects speaks to themselves. No one has chosen either option of the yes, but we will let that run. Thank you, Danelle. So Damien, I'm going to come to you next. And in your role, you work with a variety of stakeholders, right? You work with banks, fintechs, tech players, corporates, clearing houses. And I think you're very well placed to give us, again, a very broad view of how the industry is responding, right? As well as any interesting developments that you may be privy to. So Damien, over to you. And again, just give us a quick intro about yourself as well.
Sure. Thanks, Nick. And so indeed, my name is Damien Dugoquier. Even my wife, who's Malaysian, struggles with my name. So that's completely fair. So I'm the co-founder and CEO of iPaid. iPaid is a global KYP platform. KYP stands for Know Your Payee. Essentially, it's the ability to verify, confirm, and risk score a payee before a transaction is being done. And so a platform is being used by banks and non-banks to verify on a real-time basis. Around 80% of bank accounts today are covered through a solution. And indeed, we're seeing different types of responses to fraud and scams. And it's changing because the fraud itself is evolving. We've heard that from Avalon and Barry. I think Barry, very interesting data point, 46% of cases were deception cases. It's also, I think, known sometimes as an authorized push payment fraud. Essentially, when the victim, the payer, is convinced, is tricked into sending money to the fraudster, typically through a mule account. I saw a lot of attendees are from Singapore. Singapore is one of the countries that is the most affected by those kind of scams. On average, around $4,000 every year is lost per citizen due to scams of APP fraud. So this was the data from the Financial Times. So what are we seeing that is being done globally? I've tried to group that in 5 types of responses. The first type of measures that we're seeing, which are typically pushed by regulators and politicians, it's about better informing the payers before they approve a payment of a potential risk of that payment being a scam. That's often known through confirmation of payee, verification of payee. So that's that concept of name checking a payment before the payment is approved. It's actually something that existed for quite a while in Asia, but it's now finally coming to the likes of Australia, the UK, Europe, and it's being mandated in more and more countries. So first one, better information of payers. The second one is thanks to players like Swift and Paynet here. So I would say payment utilities that have a lot of data assets. So it's basically leveraging data analytics, network analytics to build risk score, fraud detection, anomaly detection, to stop or ideally even prevent scams and fraud. And so we're seeing that everywhere, payment systems building fraud detection and risk scoring capabilities. Third, we're seeing measures to try to stop, to close the door on scammers as soon as possible. So as soon as an account is flagged as a mule account or an account is suspected of being involved in a fraud case, we're seeing initiatives to propagate that information as widely and as quickly as possible to the other financial institutions. Can be done through centralized databases from the police or the payment system, but you also have creative commercial organizations that are crawling the dark web to find information about mule accounts. Some companies are even basically built a business model of scamming the scammers. Those are entertaining conversations with the scammers until they get to the point of collecting the bank accounts, which is the mule bank account, and then they're selling that database to financial institutions or people like us, so that we can then help our clients to prevent payments to mule accounts. Fourth, we're seeing, and I saw some people from Australia, we're seeing more and more data exchange between banks and non-banks. Typically banks collaborating with telcos, because one of the interesting data points is that most victims, when they're approving a payment, it's actually online with the scammer. It's on the phone with the scammer. And so that's where collaboration between telcos and banks can help to identify or identify this as a risk factor. Second type of collaboration with non-banks is with platforms like Facebook, Meta, and so forth. In the UK, they're leading the effort on that because they've also noticed that 50% of scams in the UK were initiated through a Meta platform, Instagram, Facebook, or WhatsApp. And lastly, we're seeing private organizations, the like of Feedzai, BioCatch, Sardines, that were first providing very localized solutions, but now they're starting to create sort of a private consortium or data exchange platform between their own customers so that they can enrich the kind of detection that they provide. So all in all, at iPaid, we believe that all of the above is needed, the 5 types of responses. And our goal is to enable an easier access to all those platforms by aggregating and standardizing the access to all those types of responses that we're observing globally.
Thank you, Damien. I think you've given me back a bit more hope after the bleak introduction from Barry and Avalon. Obviously, much more work to be done, but I think how you have framed it, and particularly for the guests that are here today and will listen in the recording, hopefully that gives them a good platform that they can build on top of, and depending on their own use case, but they can perhaps contribute to one of those 5 sections that you had helpfully highlighted as well. So thank you. Friedrich, I'm going to come to you next. And you've probably heard this a lot, but at BIS, right, we like to call you in industry central bank to central banks. And in your role in particular, right, I know you're paying a lot of attention to driving innovation. So I think I'd like to understand, how is the BIS Innovation Hub? How are you driving collaboration with the industry, right? And Damon gave some examples earlier via, quite a few of your projects, and maybe just zero in, Friedrich, on 1 or 2 of the ones that, the industry here really needs to know more about, and introduce yourself to, obviously.
Yes, thanks, Nick. Yes, so Friedrich Klinger from the BIS Innovation Hub, Singapore, advisor and tech lead here. And my work areas are mainly around digital assets and tokenized money, as well as privacy enhancing technologies for compliance and the integrity of the financial system in general. And of course, the BIS Innovation Hub in the BIS Innovation Hub, we have an interesting perspective here, right? Because we work a lot with the central banks, with the regulators, but also with the industry. So we're really trying to often bridge the 2 sides to tackle such problems. And to look a bit into the projects specifically, we work on, so one is Project Mandala, where we built a peer-to-peer system that allows financial institutions to conduct certain checks ahead of a transaction. So this usually applies for compliance checks, but can of course also extend it to other types of checks. And these checks are usually conducted in a privacy-preserving way. So often what we found is that financial institutions would like to share more data, but they can't due to privacy restrictions, right? So there's a need for new approaches where you can do data sharing without actually allowing the other side to see the data and do certain computations on this data. So this is exactly what we explored here in Mandala through, for example, zero-knowledge proofs and multi-party compute approaches. And then once the checks are conducted, the payer side can generate a proof of compliance. So this is a cryptographic proof that can be attached to the payment and can be verified by the other side, but also by other banks along the payments chain, for example. So this really allows for sort of verifiable checks that have been conducted. So again, Project Mandala, a flagship project from the BISIH in Singapore. And another project that is interesting in this context is called Project Hertha, where we looked more into domestic payment systems. So what is the payment system perspective here? And Hertha found a way, in a privacy-preserving way as well, to facilitate typology sharing with banks and payment service providers, which of course then in turn helps the banks and PSPs to detect fraud in a better way, because they know typologies. Often, of course, the payment system has a broader view than just a single institution of the picture. So this is mainly on domestic payment systems in Project Hertha. We are currently also scoping another project that does something similar on a cross-border basis, because of course cross-border fraud is much harder to detect, but it is still something we're sketching out at the moment.
No, thank you, Friedrich. Barry, hold your horses, because I'm definitely going to come to you about cross-border challenges as well. But Friedrich, thank you, and I think again very encouraging to know that this has the BIS's attention, and I'm sure the public here will want to dig into some of the projects that you mentioned. But before we get into challenges, maybe in keeping with the can-do spirit, Aloysius, I'm going to come to you. And again, we are very proud, right, in hearing that PayNet and Bank Negara, you have launched a award-winning national fraud portal, right? So I'm quite keen to understand, Aloysius, like what were some of the motivations behind this? And, you know, as very practical folks here, like how is it coming along? Have you seen any outcomes thus far? And obviously, Aloysius, do introduce yourself as well.
All right. Thanks, Nick. Hello, everyone. I'm Aloysius. I lead fraud and AI at PayNet, or Payments Network Malaysia, which is the shared payment infrastructure that connects the banks and other financial institutions in Malaysia for retail payments. My role is on leading the ecosystem fraud strategy from PayNet's point of view. So we work very closely with the central bank as well as law enforcement agencies locally. And a lot of the work is around building national scale systems that can actually improve the trust and resilience in our payment ecosystem. So to address the questions, what were the motivations for us to build a national fraud portal? This can be a long story, but I'll try to keep it short. Similar to most countries, we had a very clear trend of fraud and scams happening, and it started to become quite an issue. But there was a trigger point that accelerated all of this. In somewhere between Q1 and Q2 of 2022, we were hit with a very large wave as a country of malware APK. So they were cleaning services applications as well as bus hiring services for children. And a lot of people, thousands of them, got hit with this and got their accounts drained. And from there, the government actually moved very quickly in a couple of months to set up a construct called the National Scam Response Center for Malaysia. So that started by bringing banks in, right? Sitting in a command center and trying to follow the money, collect the intel, block the accounts, and so on. It took 6 months for them to realize that we can't do this manually forever. We're always too slow. And so PayNet came in, and as someone who's already integrated with all the banks as well as the digital wallets, we offered to build a platform. Right, the National Fraud Portal may not be the most creative name out there, but but I think we were very focused on the design rather than the naming convention at the time. And the first thing we wanted to leverage was that trusted connectivity with all the financial institutions of the country at the time, as well as the fact that PayNet already clears easily 60 to 70% of all retail payments, where the fraud fund flows majority would be anyway. Right, so we put that together. It was very fortunate as well that 2 years back we already started a mule database consortium service where the banks could exchange information about money mules. And so we decided, let's put them all together, and since then we've launched it in 1st April last year, with very good participation support. It's not really mandated. It is strongly encouraged by our regulator, but can mean the same thing, I suppose. We have about 55 banks and digital wallets, all onboarded within a single year. And to date, I think we've tackled about 60,000 cases, traced and closed with a pretty decent chance of recovery. The last we checked, 1 out of 5 early reported cases we get 100% of their money earmarked for recovery over time. So so that's the story and motivation around it, right? There was some panic and so on, but I think from PayNet's perspective as well as the regulator's perspective, one of the things that was always the key motivator for doing National Fraud Portal at this level was to standardize data, right? Taxonomies. How do we treat money mules, classify them properly? How do we turn payment schemas, right? Whether it's a card, account to account, QR payment into an interoperable layer that can be analyzed holistically. And that was really a very big part of the motivation for us to do this. And this is something, and we're very proud to say that building on this momentum, we've managed to build an interesting network-based overlay model that looks at how fraud can be detected beyond an institutional silo, right? Beyond knowing the customer, but rather in looking at the patterns that are moving across the fund flows as well as the entities that are interacting. And it's been very interesting. We're happy to announce that we'll be going beta on this proactive mule scoring service sometime next month. So far, the back tests as well as back end monitoring has been quite promising. We're doing about 95% accuracy overall, which is always a good thing until anything. Yeah. So so that's what's happening in this side of the world. At least our country. We are also doing a lot of interesting exploration because we do very well with the fund transfers and the ATMs, and suddenly it goes to e-commerce, and cross-border recently has become something very big. I know what project Frederick is talking about. Our regulators already had some conversations with us on that. So yeah, I think there's still a lot of work to be done in this space. Yep.
Thank you. No, thanks, Aloysius, and well done on that prompt response, right? And I saw Damien taking notes there when you mentioned the mule account going into beta. I know he's thinking of some product ideas there. See, that's the whole point, right? Everyone to collaborate to fight fraud. But I think some of the examples that we heard were quite domestic, and no doubt we are making progress in fighting crime or fraud domestically, right? And across some of Damien's 5 pillars as well. But Barry, when we have caught up privately as well, I think we've also spoken about the challenge when this needs to go cross-border, right? So if you think, Barry, from your perspective as law enforcement, could you maybe tell us about what are some of these practical challenges that are being faced, particularly to fight fraud, more so from a cross-border standpoint as well?
Sure. Actually, I think there are some challenges stemming from the different jurisdictional policy, because as a legal force enforcement agency, we think that the legal force and enforcement agency around the world face some significant jurisdictional challenges related to the data sovereignty, which refers to the notion that the data is subject to the law and governance of the country in which it is located. Because I totally agree that the united or alliance within the ecosystem, in particular for the data sharing or information sharing, are very important. But actually, we are facing some challenges, is what I mentioned, is because we are subject to different laws and regulations. So one major challenges as a police or legal enforcement is that we could not easily get some data or information from the other countries or regions, so that we could not take some timely actions to fight these crimes. So I think data, including some data storage, because some data can be stored in multiple jurisdictions, like complicating the legal access for law enforcement. Because, for example, if the data, a company in Hong Kong, but the data is stored outside Hong Kong, actually we could not exercise the power under Hong Kong's jurisdiction to get some information which is stored in others' country and regions. So this is what we are facing the challenge. The second one is, I think, the lengthy bureaucratic procedures is one of the issues as well, because as you know, when we are processing a case or for some investigation or prosecution, we need to go through different kind of the procedure under some mutual legal assistance treaty across different regions. We have to go through different procedures to get the data or information to do some investigation against the criminals. But however, it will take times to get these information for the prosecution. So I think this is another challenge. Furthermore, I think another challenge is varying level of technological infrastructure and capability amongst the countries. Because while some countries have advanced tool or legal frameworks to facilitate the data sharing and access, but some of them may lack the necessary resources to cater these needs. For example, this disparity can lead to uneven enforcement capability, where certain jurisdictions can more effectively combat cybercrime or other offenses than others, potentially allowing some criminal to exploit some weaker system in other regions. This is what I think for the challenges across different jurisdictions. Yeah.
No, thank you, Barry. And if you notice, our panel today is, we started off bleak, got a bit hopeful. Now we are going to the bleak section again. And
but
I do know, I do know, Friedrich, right? You potentially have some ideas around solving this, but I will come to you a bit later. Maybe just to build on the challenges a bit, right, Damien? I'm going to come to you next, because I mean, you are, by the nature of your business, you're a global fintech, and I'm sure you are exposed to many of these challenges, right, in executing your global product set. So maybe somewhat similar question: how fragmented do you see is the landscape, be it on data, like some of the various jurisdictional challenges that Barry has highlighted, and any views on how you're seeing some of the industry respond to that landscape as well?
Yep. So data privacy is always a bit the elephant in the room when we talk about fraud prevention. And I think it is something that we have to live with, but it is not a blocking factor anymore. So I think Friedrich was highlighting some of the technological solutions that are out there. But we can also start with whatever is possible and be very pragmatic. So to give you a concrete example, in Europe, for instance, until 2 years ago, it was considered completely impossible to do a pre-transaction name check of a payment. It was considered that this would be in conflict with data privacy, GDPR, and so forth. By next month, October, every payment in Europe will have to be name checked. And the regulator has made it clear that this is not in conflict with data privacy, because it is legitimate and proportionate with that objective of reducing the fraud risk. Having said that, I think we will never have one common interpretation of what is the right level of data privacy, and we'll always have different flavors around the world in terms of what is acceptable, what is not. To take the concrete example of payee verification, we see so many flavors of the exact same solution globally. If you look at Japan or most countries in Asia, payee verification was very simple. It's basically when you create a payment, you select the bank, you put the account number, you see the name. So that's an account resolution, a name fetch, essentially. Then the Middle East, when they implemented it, they thought that that was maybe pushing a bit too far. So in the Middle East, what you see is a name that is partially masked. But the interpretation of what is the right masking is not the same in the different countries. Then you have Europe. UK introduced the concept of, yes, you can share the name, but only if the name match is strong enough, meaning the name provided by the payer is close enough to the correct name, the real name of the payee. Europe followed that, but with a different definition of what is a close match. Then some other countries say you can never share the name. And in Hong Kong, if I'm not mistaken, Barry, it's not pre-transaction, but it's done post-transaction. So when you send a payment, if the name you've provided is not correct, then the receiving bank will stop the payment post-transaction. So if you're HSBC and you have to manage all that complexity globally, that's a hassle. And that's a real fragmentation. And to be honest, I don't think that fragmentation will go away, because every country has its right to define what is right, what is wrong in terms of data sharing. So I think it's about standardization is great. And it's about also having solutions that just make it easier for banks to operate on a global scale. That's actually why we created iPid. I kind of like sometimes to call ourselves the Spotify of prepayment verification. So we're trying to put together all the existing solution and just make the access and the consumption easier for our clients through that middleware layer that we provide. So challenges, yes. Mostly, I think, practical challenges for banks. How do you connect to the new great platform that PayNet has created and the next one that the Philippines will create? But it also means that new solutions are being created to solve the problem, which is positive, right? Again, to be back on the positive side.
No, thank you very much, Damien. I think it's that perpetual challenge in striking a balance, right, between, and we're hearing countries use this word a lot now, right? Their data and digital sovereignty versus needing to accept, right, there is going to be inevitably some form of fragmentation. So we're going to hit to the last portion of today's conversation, which really is around technology and collaboration. And Friedrich, I'm going to come to you first, right? Because we've had a few conversations, right, on zero knowledge proofs and Mandala. I would like you maybe to respond to some of the challenges that maybe Barry in particular has highlighted around, jurisdictions, and Damien built on that as well. And really, Friedrich, like, who else really needs to embrace this so that we can start making a difference, in fighting fraud and scams?
Yeah. Some great points, and I mean, those challenges were also, as we started working on these projects, we heard a lot of challenges from the industry, and even if you propose a new technology solution, the first thing you will hear from the industry is, "That's great, but will my regulator be on board if I do this?" Right? So it's crucial here that we have these public-private partnerships to explore those new technologies, and especially if we look into something like zero knowledge proofs for compliance or for certain fraud checks, then of course they need to be acknowledged as a legit way to conduct those checks by the regulator. So that's certainly something that we are working on with the regulators as well, at least in an experimental context so far. And I think it's, so that's for zero knowledge proofs, of course, but for other technologies like multi-party compute approaches. So it's another technology we also explored in Mandala that allows you to do a certain computation on fully encrypted data, where both parties or multiple parties put in encrypted data into the computation, and then you do, for example, a sanctions check or another computation. So for those, actually, we we are quite hopeful. What we are seeing at the moment, for example, is that when, for example, an entity was fraudulent, an entity worked with a certain fintech, so you have multiple fintechs right in a jurisdiction, you have an entity that is in one of the fintechs, and then they get offboarded from this fintech, but the fintech is not really able to share with anyone else that this was a fraudulent entity. So for exactly the mentioned data privacy requirements that are different in every jurisdiction, but also similar in every jurisdiction in that sense, so that the problem is actually there in most. And through, for example, multi-party compute approaches, what you can do then is you can have a privacy preserving check whenever a fintech onboards a new entity or a new customer. Is this customer blacklisted by any of the other fintechs in my jurisdiction, or potentially also in a cross-jurisdictional arrangement? So that's really something we see as promising at the moment. Of course, other technologies as well, such as trust execution environments, where you can conduct confidential computations that with a guaranteed output. So those are all the things we are seeing at the moment, and we're also looking into for our projects.
No, thank you, Friedrich, for your last example. I can assure you, wearing my professional hat, that's something that we in the bank are very keen, and hopefully we can crack a nut, crack that nut in the industry, from that perspective as well. Aloysius, I'm going to come to you next. Given you have deployed NFP, you mentioned you're seeing some success. I do want to get a sense of like, how did you think about the technology stack that you had to use to deploy this, and how did you get a lot of those parties to collaborate, right? Because like the title of our webinar is, leveraging collaboration and technology in fighting fraud.
Right. Thanks, Nick. Actually, that's a very good point. To be honest, technology was important, but it was never the most critical part of doing this. It was, in fact, the least difficult part to solve as part of doing it. We spent less than 3 months building the system itself, but instead took 8 to 10 months working towards common data standards as well as protocols around different parties, right? Trying to align some level of risk appetite, trying to convince the various parties that this is a safe and trusted consortium for sharing that kind of information, right? So that was always the most painful part. In the end, I think we were only successful because our central bank actually came forward and gave the assurance to everyone that this level of data standardization was permitted, right? And with certain conditions, of course, as well as curated the process, right? Because when it comes to blocking accounts, exiting customers and so on, it's always very sensitive with banks. Some are exceptionally strict. And I think we had to strike it was very difficult to strike that balance between vigilant, but also not creating a bigger social problem by just trying to de-risk everything within institutions. So yeah, I would say the collaboration portion was more governance, trust, process. The technology is just an enabling layer above it. We do try to practice privacy enhancing techniques where possible. We haven't gotten to a very sophisticated level simply because tracing funds, blocking accounts, and sharing identities tends to be a very precise endeavor. We're still trying to crack that part of it, doing it safe and quickly. But that's an area that we're definitely exploring and looking at to at least build up more assurance and trust in that system in the long term.
No, thanks, Aloysius. I think both you and Friedrich brought very valuable points, because from your perspective, I love what you say, that technology here was an enabler, but actually having the central bank kind of create a safe environment for everyone to collaborate was equally, if not more important. And I guess some of the technologies that Friedrich spoke about could be innovative and change, right? Actually enable new ways in which we can share data safely, right? So I think it's important that we all think about it from both lenses. Avalon, I've kept you waiting for quite a bit from your first question, but it was intentional. I wanted to give you the last word, as we close out the section. And I'm very aware that Swift has a fraud program, right? I think it's moving along quite well, and it leverages AI. So could you just tell us a bit, in the spirit of exploring technology as well, how exactly is AI being used, and how are you bringing the community, right, of your banks and shareholders together?
I think the why has been clearly explained, both in what Aloysius has experienced, but also what Friedrich's really explained around. Right now, we're very much limited to how we can tackle fraud. And if you think of it from a bank perspective, they very much are limited to only monitoring transactions from within their own ecosystem, right? You can't go and like ring up your friends down the road and say, well, what did you find on this transaction, or have you seen it? It's just not possible. So I think when we look at Swift and the ecosystem in which we're able to interoperate, we have access to billions and billions of payments data markers, and how do we start to leverage that effectively becomes the big question. And so there's a couple of things underway, and I think it's also important to say this is a very big change to Swift's DNA of the past, where we're actually saying, and I see Damien nodding, he knows this all too well, right? This has always been, we're just a network operator, we're just here to move value. But here we're saying, hold on a second, we're sitting on insights. We know that the problem is fragmentation. We know that it's silo. How can we leverage these data points? From a technology perspective, we also know that techniques like AI work far better over large data sets than what they do in small data sets. And right now, banks are having to tackle everything within their smaller data set. So that's also one of the reasons why Swift is going on this mission to say, well, how do we start to look for patterns of behavior across our very large data set? So we have, I guess you call them 5 security markers across the network that have been built in collaboration with a number of different banks across the globe. And what we're looking for is statistically significant changes in things like value, volume, has an account never received funds before, has an account been involved in a payment recall, all of these insights that as a sending bank, you have no visibility on whatsoever. So here it's just about giving account level statistical information. And then what we have is a bit of AI to look for outliers, and it's also complementing it by putting together a risk scoring model. The idea is we don't need to be, the new kids on the block, running fraud solutions. This is about being complementary. I think there's been a lot of build within the industry. How do we start to pull some of the cross-border information into it that makes sense, okay? And of course, making sure that we're keeping it at a privacy-enhancing way. And then to that point, Aloysius has really explained a fantastic initiative underway in Malaysia. It's very common for us to see these domestic solutions come to the fore, mule account sharing. It's a lot easier in a domestic circumstance because you only have a single regulatory body saying, go ahead, do it. But the truth of the matter is we're dealing with fraudsters that are multinational corporations. They have no boundaries. There's no one saying to them, well, you can't go and scrape data from Hong Kong. It's, you're based in Singapore. You can only scam people in Singapore. So it means that our approach now also, we need to think a bit bigger. And to Friedrich's point, we have the technology available. I think Federation is a fantastic option, right? It's designed to enable collaborative data analysis and machine learning across multiple institutions and jurisdictions without sharing that raw data. So Swift has initiated the industry pilot group, and our first area of exploration is really around mule account sharing. How do we start to leverage the fantastic work that's happened at all of these domestic levels and bring it into a global forum to say, listen, payments don't only get executed domestically, you're also being paid cross-border. So let's start to leverage some of that intelligence and reuse all the investment that we're making to fight what is very much a global problem.
Thank you, Evelyn. It was well worth the wait to have you to wrap it up so nicely and reference all of the other speakers as well, right? And As someone who also has a community role for Swift, I can vouch firsthand, right, that definitely Swift is evolving positively, very positively, to play a larger role in the industry. So folks, we have heard, right, from the landscape, really getting a good picture of the challenges that we are facing, some measures underway, and closing off somewhat on a hopeful note in terms of technology and collaboration. Before I invite closing remarks from each one of the panelists, I am going to put up a Slido to ask you what was the most promising thing that you heard today, and you would really like the industry to accelerate, and maybe that will inform some of the closing remarks from our panelists as well. So I don't see any of you online yet, if you don't mind, and it's a free format, not multiple choice. Get you to do some work and type a bit.
While we wait for that, I'm just going to
Yep.
jump in also because we have to end on time. So if I can encourage the panelists to do their remarks within that really short, concise, so that all on the audience find it very, very easy to repeat it when they go and tell all their colleagues and anybody in their network that should watch this recording. Would that be okay? It's always hard to be short and concise in a sentence.
No, they're well trained and informed in advance, so I'm sure they will keep it nice and tidy. So I think there's some great points here so far. Technology isn't a blocker, a fence against the scammers. Damon, I'm not sure if you're talking about Granny AI at one point in time, right? To kind of disrupt the scammers. I've seen that becoming a thing as well. So thank you everyone for your input. This is really great. We'll take a copy of it and we'll certainly circulate some of the points here. And as speakers and broader industry folks, we'll make sure this gets shared. And I promise Camilla and I will do our part to keep this conversation going as well. So I would now like to invite everyone for closing remarks. Maybe let's aim for 45-second stops. And Damien, we will start with you. I guess the key question is, you have your soapbox, right? You have a great audience. What's your rallying cry to the audience, Damien?
So fraudsters are very pragmatic. We also need to be pragmatic. We need both collaboration, interoperability, but if we only do that, the fraudsters will keep on winning. So we also need to leverage the existing solutions that are available out there.
Thank you, Damien. Very pragmatic indeed. Friedrich.
Yes. Fighting fraud does not have to come at the cost of privacy, because we have the technologies now that allow for an equilibrium between the two.
Wow, super concise. Thank you. Avalon.
Sure, I would say that we are all equally responsible for feeding up to our regulators about the need to make this a global fight. This cannot just be the likes of, Swift and others on this call making the noise. As institutions, as parts of this ecosystem, everyone is equally responsible to go and have those conversations, to put that pressure where it's necessary, because to Friedrich's point, the technology is now available that it will not disrupt data privacy. So let's go forward.
Thank you so much, Avalon. Aloysius.
Yep. My closing remarks would be we should start working towards common cross-border standards, because as everyone works on their own domestic version of whatever solution it is, at some point we're going to have to refactor everything individually, and that's going to be a pain.
Absolutely. Thank you. And Barry, as law enforcement, we will let you have the last word.
Thank you, Nick. As a legal enforcement agency, I would say, unlike the traditional crime, I think only relying on the legal enforcement agency to fight against fraud is definitely not sufficient. I think alliance within the entire ecosystem, in particular the adopting some public-private partnership, is the key success of fighting fraud. And also, I think good collaboration between us, utilization of technology and data sharing, and well-organized regulatory or legal framework would be the most important things nowadays. Yeah. Thank you.
No, thank you. Thank you, Barry. I think we couldn't have put it any better, right? When you said we all just can't rely on you and your partners and your peers as law enforcement. We are all equally in it, and I got very similar vibes, from all the other participants as well. I think that given we are at time, the very last thing we have to say here is a big thank you to our speakers. I think you did an amazing job in articulating some of the challenges, but also equally demonstrating, that there is some promise. And I think what I hope, as Camilla says, PPP, right? Passionate payment professionals, we can all connect with one another. Like Friedrich, you're sharing some of the foundational work BIS is doing. I'm sure you're open to people coming into you to collaborate and look for ideas. I think that's what we really want to drive, to use the word heard today, public-private partnership as well. And thank you to everyone who has joined. Camilla, shall I give you the final word to close us out?
Yes, I need to say, we talked about collaboration. So the next steps is Dan will share a QR code for those of you who are not members yet but want to stay connected. So we will announce our working group towards the end of the year in November. We're running a few more initiatives, among others a roundtable in Mumbai on the 8th of October, and just really defining what can we do with our very expanded membership from global banks like HSBC, like SWIFT, like PayNet, to really come together and be a strong voice into policymaker for capacity building, but also for that shared understanding. As we always say, all boats rise with the tide. We really have to be vocal about this so we help everyone. So with that note, thank you very much. Scan the QR code and let us know, what do you think is the smallest part we can break off to really make a big impact? Thank you, Alexis. Thank you, Avalon, Barry, Damien, Friedrich, and Nick. Thank you very much for moderating this session. See you next time.
Thank